Welcome to another episode of PCA Deep Dive, where we look beneath the surface of policy, payment, regulation, and access to ask what is really shaping chiropractic care in Pennsylvania. Today, we are looking at one of the biggest questions facing the profession. What happens when modern training, modern patient needs, and modern conservative care collide with an outdated scope of practice law built for another era? Pennsylvania's chiropractic scope of practice is nearly 50 years old. It was written in a very different healthcare world during a period when chiropractic was still fighting for recognition, legitimacy, and a seat at the table. That history matters because scope of practice laws do not just sit quietly in books. They shape access. They shape workforce decisions. They shape what care is available, where it is available, and how efficiently doctors can serve patients. The deeper question is this: are we allowing modern doctors to practice in a way that reflects modern education, modern evidence, and modern patient need? In this episode, we examine new research, workforce realities, rural access concerns, delegation barriers, and the hidden cost of trying to deliver 21st century conservative care through 1970s legal code. This is not about removing patient protections. It is about asking whether Pennsylvania's current scope of practice still fits the patients, providers, and communities it is supposed to serve. Let's dive in.
Imagine upgrading your smartphone this year to, the most advanced model available.
Oh, yeah. The one with the fastest processor, the brilliant display.
Exactly. You've got access to this whole ecosystem of cutting-edge apps designed to make your life infinitely more efficient. But now, imagine trying to boot up that brand new hardware only to discover it's been forced to run on an operating system that was coded 50 years ago.
Oh, wow. That sounds like a nightmare.
It really would be. I mean, the hardware is desperate to perform, the apps are trying to execute these complex functions, but the underlying system architecture, it simply doesn't recognize the commands.
Yeah, so it just constantly throttles your bandwidth.
Right, it restricts your access, and eventually the entire system just crashes.
Because it creates this massive artificial bottleneck. I mean, you have immense capability right there in your hand, but you are completely blocked from utilizing it by legacy code.
Legacy code that was never designed to understand modern demands.
Exactly. And, that technological bottleneck is really the perfect lens for examining what is happening right now in Pennsylvania.
Oh, absolutely.
So, welcome to today's deep dive, everyone. We are not talking about consumer electronics today, obviously. We are unpacking a critical issue in healthcare.
Yeah, specifically the delivery of conservative, non-pharmacological pain care.
And we have a really robust stack of sources for you today. We are pulling from policy briefs published by the Knee Regulatory Research Center at West Virginia University.
We've also got accreditation standards from the Council on Chiropractic Education.
Yeah, and some fascinating legislative data mapping Pennsylvania's healthcare workforce.
Because we are looking at a system under immense strain here. I mean, we're examining the legal framework that dictates what chiropractors are actually permitted to do in Pennsylvania.
And exploring how those regulatory boundaries just, ripple out to affect integrated care models, rural health access, and obviously the patients relying on these systems, which is the most important part.
Exactly. Which brings us to the core question we want you to really think about today. What happens when modern clinical training, modern patient needs, and modern non-pharmacological care policy collide head-on with a scope law built for another era?
Yeah, and to understand the symptoms of this systemic failure, we have to look at the outdated code causing the friction.
The 50-year-old operating system.
Precisely. Pennsylvania's framework governing chiropractic scope of practice is nearly 50 years old. I mean, it has not been comprehensively modernized since it was established.
Let's put that timeline into perspective for everyone listening, because we are talking about statutory language written in the 1970s.
Yeah, a totally different world.
It really was.
Yeah.
And we need to consider the environment of the 1970s medical landscape. That era was defined by intense professional conflict.
Oh, definitely.
I mean, this was the time of organized medicine's historical opposition to chiropractic care. Most notably, the American Medical Association's Committee on Quackery.
Right, which was an active institutional effort to contain the profession.
Exactly. So the regulations born from that era were largely about building walls. They weren't about facilitating integrated evidence-based clinical standards.
No, not at all. And that historical context really explains the architecture of the law. Plus, it highlights the fundamental mismatch we see today.
Because things have changed.
Dramatically. The chiropractic profession has evolved so much over the last half-century. Today, chiropractic education is governed by strict, nationally recognized standards.
Through the Council on Chiropractic Education, right, the CCE.
Yes, exactly.
And I want to be really clear about something before we go any further. Pointing out that a law is 50 years old is not the same as saying it is entirely useless or inherently unsafe.
Oh, for sure. Some regulations serve as vital patient protections.
But other regulations survive simply as institutional scar tissue. The argument running through these sources is not that the law is unsafe. It's that Pennsylvania's law is outdated, highly restrictive, plagued by ambiguity, and just completely disconnected from modern training.
Yeah, it's a massive disconnect. I mean, look
Yeah.
at the CCE requirements. We're talking about a minimum of 4,200 instructional hours.
Wait, 4,200 hours?
Yeah. And the curriculum is incredibly rigorous. It heavily fronts basic sciences, gross anatomy, neurophysiology, pathology, before moving into complex clinical sciences.
So that includes what? Physical diagnostics?
Physical and laboratory diagnostics, interpreting advanced imaging, neurology, and neuromusculoskeletal rehabilitation. It's thoroughly 21st century training.
Designed to produce primary spine practitioners capable of complex differential diagnosis.
Exactly.
But when those highly trained graduates cross the border into Pennsylvania, the state statute essentially forces them to operate with one hand tied behind their back.
It really does.
I want to dig into the West Virginia University brief because they didn't just look at the laws, they actually quantified them.
They developed this regulatory restrictiveness index.
Yeah, and where exactly does Pennsylvania land on that spectrum? I mean, how bad is it?
Well, it lands near the very bottom for practice freedom. On the WVU index, Pennsylvania ranks as the third most restrictive state in the entire nation for chiropractic scope of practice.
Wow. Third most restrictive. I'm looking at this score of 9 on their restrictiveness index.
Yeah, and keep in mind, the national average sits around 4.59.
Okay, so a 9 versus a 4.59. That means Pennsylvania is functioning in a completely different regulatory universe.
Totally different.
But a number on a page doesn't treat a patient. What is the actual clinical barrier a provider hits, on a Tuesday morning because of that score?
The researchers evaluated 12 specific diagnostic or therapeutic procedures.
Okay, like what kind of procedures?
Interventions like ultrasound therapy, administering nutritional supplements, interpreting blood work, or utilizing dry needling.
Got it.
Out of those 12 evaluated procedures, Pennsylvania chiropractors can perform only one without requiring additional supplemental licensure or certification.
Wait, really? Just 1 out of 12?
Just one.
So they can perform extremity adjustments like manipulating the joints outside the spine, but for everything else on that list, they just hit a wall.
Exactly.
And I want to explore how that wall is built, because the brief emphasizes this concept of ambiguity,
Yes, that's a huge factor.
which implies the state statute doesn't always explicitly outlaw these therapies. It just fails to mention them because the authors in the 1970s couldn't anticipate modern modalities.
And in the realm of healthcare regulation, ambiguity basically operates as a functional ban.
Because of the risk, right?
Exactly. If a statute is silent on a modern therapy, providers generally refuse to offer it. They will not risk their professional license, their livelihood, or their practice just to navigate undefined regulatory gray areas.
So the chilling effect is profound.
Very profound.
Let's apply that chilling effect to diagnostics, because the brief itself appears to reveal tension around Pennsylvania Diagnostic Authority, which is exactly why statutory clarity matters.
Yeah, if a practitioner is evaluating a complex musculoskeletal presentation, they have to rule out severe underlying pathologies.
So if a chiropractor identifies clinical red flags that may warrant advanced imaging, unclear or restrictive ordering authority can force an additional referral step, adding time, cost, and delay.
Exactly. It forces the chiropractor to send the patient back out into the broader medical system just to get permission for the scan.
Which introduces massive friction.
Oh, absolutely.
I mean, think about it. The patient has to go book an appointment with their primary care physician, pay another copay, take more time off work, and wait another week or two just to get the imaging order the initial doctor already knew was clinically indicated.
It completely fractures the continuity of care.
It really does. It delays diagnosis and inflates costs across the board.
And we have to recognize that this friction does not impact all demographics equally.
The geography matters.
Huge time. If we transition from the restrictiveness index to the county-level chiropractor density maps provided in the research, a very concerning geographical divide emerges.
Because aggregate state numbers can be pretty deceiving.
Yeah, on paper, Pennsylvania's total supply of chiropractors might look moderate compared to its neighbors. but the maps show severe geographic maldistribution.
So where are they all concentrated?
Well, we see metropolitan areas such as Allegheny County or the Philadelphia suburbs enjoying incredibly robust access. Some of those areas boast up to 12.2 chiropractors per 10,000 residents.
Okay, 12.2 is pretty solid.
But as you move into rural central and northern Pennsylvania, the bottom just falls out.
How far down does it go?
In many of those rural counties, the density plummets to just 2 to 3 practitioners per 10,000 residents.
Wow, 2 to 3. Let's translate those statistics into a human reality for you listening. Think about a rural patient dealing with acute, debilitating back pain.
Yeah, that's a tough situation.
They likely have limited transportation options, restricted provider choice within their insurance network, and very limited time. In that environment, regulatory ambiguity is not an abstract academic debate.
No, it becomes distance, delay, cost, and fewer conservative care options.
It creates a literal healthcare desert for non-pharmacological pain management.
It does. And this geographic disparity is intrinsically linked to the state's educational infrastructure and its workforce pipeline.
Because the maldistribution isn't an accident.
No, it is the natural outcome of where and how these doctors are trained.
The workforce data in these sources is honestly alarming.
Yep.
Pennsylvania is projecting a loss of over 100 chiropractors annually over the next decade due to a wave of retirements.
Yeah, and the recruitment of new practitioners to backfill those losses is lagging significantly.
So why is the pipeline failing to replenish the workforce?
Well, a critical factor is that Pennsylvania currently lacks a CCE-accredited chiropractic college.
You don't have one at all right now.
Not a fully accredited one, no. So aspiring doctors are forced to leave the state to pursue their 4,200 hours of training. They often migrate to New York, Connecticut, or the Midwest.
And the data consistently shows that healthcare providers disproportionately establish their practices in close proximity to where they train.
Exactly. They build professional networks, complete clinical rotations, and put down roots in those communities.
Okay, but we have to pause on the workforce solutions mentioned in the sources, specifically the University of Pittsburgh launching a Doctor of Chiropractic program.
Yes, that's a really interesting development.
The historical irony here is staggering, and it really highlights the paradigm shift. In the 1970s, organized medicine actively tried to suppress the profession. Fast forward to today, and Pitt, a massive NIH-funded allopathic medical research powerhouse, is integrating chiropractic education into its School of Health and Rehabilitation Sciences.
It perfectly illustrates how far the clinical science and institutional acceptance have evolved, even as the statutory framework has remained totally frozen in time.
And the PIT program represents a potential homegrown solution to the workforce deficit, though it is still navigating the CCE accreditation process.
True. But we also have to look at the broader picture here.
Yeah, because I want to push back on the idea that simply opening a school magically solves the problem.
It really doesn't.
Let's look at the economic incentive structure. If training is standardized nationally through board exams, but clinical permission varies dramatically by state, the root issue isn't simply education, it is law.
That's the crux of it.
Imagine you are a newly minted doctor carrying a mountain of student debt. Why would you choose to establish a practice in Pennsylvania where your professional autonomy is heavily constrained when you could easily cross state lines to practice at the top of your license?
You probably wouldn't. That is the central economic dilemma driving the brain drain. Graduates look at the regulatory map. They see states with modernized scopes that allow them to actually utilize their full diagnostic and therapeutic training.
And then they look at PA.
Yeah, and returning to Pennsylvania means accepting artificial limits on their practice revenue and clinical capabilities. The law itself acts as a repellent for the exact healthcare talent those rural counties desperately need.
And the consequences of that repellent are severe, because when patients in those underserved rural areas cannot access a chiropractor, the healthcare system doesn't just halt, right?
No, it forces them down a completely different pathway.
So I want to look at how conservative care fits into integrated systems, because the sources point to environments where this actually works really well.
Yeah, a prime example of functional integration is the Veterans Health Administration.
The VA.
Exactly. The VA utilizes a whole health model, which aggressively incorporates chiropractic care alongside primary care, physical therapy, and pain medicine.
And the point is not that chiropractic replaces medicine.
Right, definitely not.
The point is that chiropractic can function as part of a broader coordinated care model when legal and institutional structures actually allow it.
Exactly. It demonstrates the value of placing conservative musculoskeletal care inside a broader healthcare system rather than isolating it outside the walls of care.
But the VA operates under federal structures that facilitate that integration. In Pennsylvania's private market, we are dealing with an insurance environment that inherently distorts care.
It really does. It's a massive system design issue.
Because declining reimbursement rates for providers, combined with rising copays for patients, make direct, multi-visit conservative care much harder to deliver and easier for payers to deny.
Yeah, the systemic design essentially incentivizes pharmacological or procedural pathways. It is often structurally easier and faster within the insurance framework to approve a prescription medication or an injection than a comprehensive regimen of therapeutic physical care.
Which brings us to the most critical intersection in this entire deep dive, the opioid reality.
This is huge.
Now, we must be incredibly precise with our language here, based on the CDC and ACP guidance. Chiropractic care is not a standalone answer to the opioid crisis, but access to conservative care changes the first decision point. Every serious opioid strategy eventually runs into the same question. What do we make available before medication becomes the default?
That decision point is everything. The WPU data notes a really disturbing correlation. Rural counties with low chiropractor density frequently overlap with health professional shortage areas that suffer from elevated opioid mortality rates.
Wow.
We have to examine the mechanism of substitution. When conservative care is geographically unavailable or delayed by referral friction, a patient with severe acute pain ends up at their primary care physician or the emergency room.
Let's follow that thread. Imagine that rural PCP clinic. The physician has a waiting room full of complex cases and a 15-minute slot for a patient with debilitating back pain.
Yeah, it's a high-pressure environment.
They don't have the time, the setup, or the specific training to perform manual therapies. And if the nearest conservative care provider is 40 miles away, what tools are left in that 15-minute window?
The primary tools available are muscle relaxants, referrals for imaging that will take weeks,
Which we already talked about.
and in severe cases, prescription opioids. The friction in the system naturally shifts the default toward medication, imaging delays, referral loops, or more invasive pathways simply because the non-pharmacological options are walled off.
So we have a shrinking workforce, practices squeezed by insurance economics, patients trapped in referral loops, and a rural care model defaulting to pharmacology.
It's a perfect storm.
It really is. So how is the state legislature actually responding to this cascading failure?
There is movement, specifically with House Bill 1106. This legislation attempts to apply a critical patch to the system.
Okay, I want to clarify for everyone listening. HB 1106 is not a comprehensive modernization of the 50-year-old scope law. It is a highly targeted, specific fix addressing an issue known as delegation.
Yes. So let's break down why delegation is currently broken in Pennsylvania.
The bottleneck stems from a specific legal precedent, State Farm versus Cavoto. It is a fascinating look at how strict statutory construction creates clinical paralysis.
How so?
The ruling essentially interpreted the outdated scope of practice in a way that prohibits chiropractors from delegating ancillary therapies like guiding a patient through a therapeutic stretch or exercise to their support staff.
Because the 1970 statute defined the practice solely around the actions performed directly by the physician. Right.
Exactly. It failed to include language that allows for the delegation of routine therapies. So, by strict legal interpretation, if the doctor isn't physically doing it, it isn't covered.
That means a highly trained clinician is reduced to standing in a rehab room, literally just watching a patient use a resistance band, completely unable to treat the next patient.
Yeah. It creates a massive artificial bottleneck in clinic workflow.
So how does HB 1106 fix this? It aims to dismantle that bottleneck by establishing a formal certification process for certified chiropractic assistants, or CCAs. And this isn't a loose standard. The certification would be administered by the National Board of Chiropractic Examiners.
I was looking at the breakdown of the NBCE exam for these assistants, and it is rigorous.
It really is.
The assessment strictly covers foundational clinical knowledge at 30%, patient safety and clinical procedures making up 40%.
Which is huge for ensuring quality of care.
Absolutely. And then documentation and regulatory compliance at 15%, and ethics and professional boundaries rounding out the final 15%.
This structured approach ensures patient safety while optimizing clinic efficiency. HB 1106 does not remove the doctor's ultimate accountability for the patient's care. It simply clarifies the legal framework so that trained, certified personnel can assist under direct clinical supervision.
It basically allows the clinic to scale. If the doctor isn't trapped supervising every single exercise repetition, they can see more patients.
which directly addresses the access issues and workforce shortages we discussed earlier.
Plus, it creates a new avenue for entry-level healthcare jobs in the state.
Win-win.
But we have to recognize that while HB 1106 is a vital, necessary patch, it is still just a software update. The overarching operating system is still from the 1970s.
Yeah, the delegation fix is crucial, but it leaves the larger structural problems totally untouched. It doesn't resolve the functional bands created by ambiguity around modern therapies. It doesn't clear up the referral friction caused by restricted diagnostic authority. And it definitely won't single-handedly reverse the geographic disparities driven by the state's broader regulatory environment.
Pulling this all together, we have journeyed through a legal framework that has stubbornly resisted modernization for half a century.
50 years is a long time in medicine.
It is. We've looked at restrictiveness indices that place Pennsylvania near the very bottom nationally, mapped out human healthcare desert in rural counties, and examined the very real consequences, both financial and pharmacological, of denying patients streamlined access to conservative care.
And we've observed how the lack of a fully accredited in-state educational pipeline compounds these regulatory barriers, starving Pennsylvania of new talent right as a demographic wave of retirements hits the existing workforce.
The ultimate takeaway from these sources is that this debate is not about permitting chiropractors to perform procedures they aren't educated to do.
No, not at all.
It is about demanding to know why Pennsylvania insists on legally preventing trained professionals from executing the exact care that modern education, integrated clinical models, and national opioid strategies already recognize as appropriate and necessary.
That is the core systemic failure here. And, I want to leave you with a broader economic thought to mull over.
Let's hear it.
We frequently see how occupational licensing and outdated scopes of practice act as profound labor market barriers, inflating systemic costs and artificially reducing patient choice. If competing states are actively leveraging modernized scope laws to draw in top-tier healthcare talent and bolster their rural access, is Pennsylvania's reluctance to rewrite its 50-year-old framework actually costing the state its competitive edge in the broader national healthcare economy?
It is a question that extends far beyond a single profession. It strikes at the heart of how a state chooses to engineer its future healthcare infrastructure. Because right now, Pennsylvania is attempting to run the future of conservative musculoskeletal care on an operating system that was coded before the personal computer even existed.
Yeah.
It is time to seriously ask when that system will finally get the total rewrite it so clearly needs. Thank you for joining us on this deep dive, and keep asking the hard questions about the hidden policies shaping your access to care.
Pennsylvania's chiropractic scope of practice is nearly 50 years old. And after everything we explored today, the question is simple. How long can we keep asking modern doctors to serve modern patients under a law built for another era? HB 1106 is an important step. It restores a clear, responsible delegation pathway, so trained certified chiropractic assistants can support care under the supervision of a licensed doctor. But this is not just the delegation fight. This is the scope fight. It is about whether Pennsylvania's chiropractic law will finally reflect modern education, modern patient needs, and modern conservative care. It is about access. It is about insurance pressure. It is about rural care. It is about whether chiropractic has a strong future in Pennsylvania. And that future will not protect itself. PCA's Lobby Day is scheduled for June 9th in Harrisburg. We know it is a practice day, but showing up in person, sitting with elected officials, and telling the story of this profession is one of the most important things we can do. If you cannot attend, please consider supporting the PCA PAC. 100% of PCA PAC donations go directly toward supporting chiropractic advocacy and our future in Pennsylvania. In the show notes, you will find a link to the WVU study on Pennsylvania's outdated scope of practice and a link to register for Lobby Day. We hope you will join us. Until next time, stay focused, keep learning, and remember, the only way we change policy, confront insurance pressure, modernize scope, and protect our future is by stepping up and getting involved.